This is Cold Start.
At the beginning of every race, you're going to see a car leading the pack. Sometimes that's just to set the overall pace for the group. We call those pace cars. Sometimes that's because the conditions warrant it. We call those safety cars. Sometimes that's because something goes really wrong and we need attention on the scene. Sometimes those are called medical cars. All of those have been pretty cool in history of racing. From NASCAR to F1, IndyCar, and elsewhere, we've seen different models of cars, different styles of approach for how we're going to go about conducting this, leading the race, restarting after something goes wrong, dealing with wrecks, dealing with safety issues. So we're going to take a deeper dive into the cars themselves, the history of where these things came from, how they differ from race series to race series, and just some really cool and interesting facts about these things that once we got to talking to each other about, we got really in depth on and had to find out more information, and our research led us to this conversation.
Yeah, even by their names of why in IndyCar and NASCAR is it called a pace car, right? To me, that's the car that leads the pack. That is like that extra car that's out on track. When cautions come out, it jumps in front of the field, all that sort of stuff. And then you start watching F1, you're like, well, they don't even call it a pace car, even though it kind of serves similar functions, not all the same things, but they call theirs a safety car. And it's kind of like, we started talking about that conversation. I'm like, well, why is one called a safety car, one's called a pace car? And it's like, oh, that's right. F1, they do standing starts. So like they don't need a car that sets the pace of the field to start the race. Unlike NASCAR and IndyCar, they do rolling starts. Circle track racing, same thing. They do rolling starts and they need a car that sets the pace. And it was even interesting when we started to look back through the history of pace cars and safety cars and when did these things start to get implemented into these different series. And for NASCAR, it was all the way back even before NASCAR was created. They had pace cars. Even as early as the early 1940s, they had pace cars for races, whether that was down on Daytona Beach when they were running actually on the beaches of Daytona, or even just at small circle tracks at your local dirt track or whatever it was. There was plenty of examples of pace cars. And when NASCAR was founded and it started, the pace car was just a part of the process to get a race going. In comparison to F1, it took them until way later on to actually have a safety car a part of the process of the series, which we'll get more into F1 a little bit later. But it was just so interesting that there was such a difference between like order of operations for a NASCAR race, IndyCar race, comparative to F1.
If you go all the way back, the first pace car, like the kind of first official pace car that was noted, was at the Indy 500 all the way back in 1911. So there's this sense that if they're going to be racing in a circle or on an oval where they're going to have to somehow manage the traffic together, they need to have some kind of speed regulator, right? A way to kind of allow the race cars to get up to speed, keep their tires warm or get them warm, while making sure that the racing conditions were free from any hazards or anything that might prevent a clean start or a restart in that condition. And then later on, to your point, in the 40s, NASCAR is coming up. We're seeing these vehicles out on track, out there to lead the field in the warm-up laps right before the green flag and helping to control the field during any kind of caution or restart conditions that would take place.
Yeah, I mean, like a pace car is just out there to make sure that the race doesn't start prematurely, right? In NASCAR and IndyCar, you want to make sure that those guys circling around don't jump the start. And then also to pace around and make sure that those guys have ample time to get into formation, right? That's also another point of the pace lap, is to take it nice and slow, make sure that we get lined up side by side or whatever the case needs to be for the start of the race, and then have a nice clean start from there. Now, of course, throughout the years, like not only have there been really interesting pace cars themselves, right? Just the cars themselves have been really cool choices by manufacturers to promote something or something like that, or even like the liveries and the color choices have been really interesting through the years. Pace cars have actually turned into collectibles for automotive enthusiasts, especially the Indy 500 cars or like the marquee races, Daytona 500, Talladega, stuff like that. People like to collect those cars. But there's also just interesting stories that have happened with pace cars. You would think that like this entity within racing that's just supposed to help you start the race is kind of like a boring, non-involved in regards to the race itself. But throughout history in NASCAR, IndyCar, as well as F1, there's been plenty of very interesting stories with the pace cars and safety cars, maybe presenting unsafe situations themselves.
It's pretty interesting to see the variation in these uses over time. In IndyCar and in NASCAR, you'll occasionally see celebrities or famous people driving the pace car for the opening lap in sort of a ceremonial way. F1 tends to save that for people waving the checkered flag at the end of the race, but you might see that out there in an IndyCar race. Something else to note is just the fact that pace cars in each of these series, have to act a little differently. The speed at which the pack is going to go out at a caution as a restart at the beginning of the race in NASCAR is pretty different than in IndyCar. And I've read that the NASCAR pace cars run in maybe 50, 60 miles an hour, kind of is the average speed you'll see one of those at. And typically they've looked a little bit more like the other cars in the pack versus Indy, where they've really highlighted manufacturer vehicles and they brought these celebrities in to kind of drive those cars. And those cars, pace cars in the IndyCar, drive about 100 to 110 miles an hour. So it's a different demand that they put on the pace car for IndyCar versus for NASCAR. And if you think about the purpose of this, the pace car, or the safety car, if you want to refer to that, it needs to be able to keep up with the traffic of these race cars. It needs to be at the head of the pack. So it's really bad when the pack catches up to the pace car or the safety car, and it can create all kinds of chaotic and unusual circumstances. And I think we'll dive into some examples of when the pace car was out on track or the safety car was involved in something that was unexpected. They weren't there just serving the purpose that was intended, which was, keeping traffic in order at the head of the pack.
Yeah, speaking about like the min speeds or the maximum speeds that the safety car or pace car has to go, like I know in F1 it's extremely important that the safety car can go a certain speed because F1 cars don't like to go below a speed, to
Right.
be able to maintain heat in the tires, maintain pace just in general. For my knowledge, like the safety car that's in F1, it's like they're basically driving like 8/10, 10/10 in whatever performance car that they're in, whether that's the Mercedes or the Aston Martin. Like they're going like as hard as they can, and the F1 cars are just kind of like cruising around, which is pretty funny to see.
Yeah, and given the kind of cars you're talking about, if you've watched Indy 500 races and you see that pace car, or if you're a car enthusiast and you've just noticed in the aftermarket, there happen to be these cars that come up for sale every once in a while, and they said, official Indy 500 pace car, and you're like, wow, how special and limited edition is this? Well, some of the manufacturers didn't exactly make a limited edition out of these things. It was, you can go to the manufacturer and order a car, and they just produced as many of these as people would order. So it wasn't always the official actual car used in the race. So for example, in the 80s, GM and Pontiac put out a series of cars that were all labeled as Indy 500 pace cars or designated in some way, but they weren't actually the car used on the racetrack during that race.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference of like the actual car that was on track, and then, manufacturers use being the pace car for the Indy 500, Daytona 500, whatever marquee event that they can as promotional material to potentially sell cars. And I mean, racing has always kind of been like that of race on Sunday, sell on Monday. Well, be the pace car on Sunday, hopefully sell some more cars on Monday. And there were cases of manufacturers doing like limited edition trim runs where it's like you get the sticker package or the special color that the pace car actually was or whatever it was. And plenty of people actually collect those, and there's great examples of those things. But I think we should go into the stories, starting with NASCAR. We should go into some fun stories throughout the years of NASCAR of when the pace car has been a part of maybe an interesting storyline or when there's been issues with the pace car and stuff like that. And I think it's very fitting because I'm sure we can all remember that line from Days of Thunder when the crew chief went and told the driver of go up and hit the pace car. And he's like, what? I'm confused. Why? Why hit the pace car? It's like, well, you've hit everything else on track. Might as well have a perfect score and go hit the pace car. So we'll talk about some NASCAR stories of when the pace cars might have gotten involved or getting into contact. And then we'll move on to IndyCar, and we'll finish off with the special story of how F1 came to about having safety cars. And that story is a lot more interesting than you might think.
You might imagine that of all the crazy stories that could happen around a pace car or something, NASCAR would be leading the pack in those. I was reading up on this and I found this video. In 1986, this was at the Winston 500 at Talladega, so a really important race in the NASCAR season. There's a dude that shows up at the race, somehow had no ticket to get in, managed to get in not just to the race, but to the infield. Was sitting out in the infield and they were putting the cars out on the grid, and he noticed the pace car was just sitting out there. The backstory is this guy apparently, I don't know, has lost his job or somehow like lost his vehicle and was casting about looking for one and saw the pace car out there on track. And he went over and got in it, and the keys were in it. So it was all lined up in front of the pack, and they were getting ready to start, and he drove. And he completed an entire lap in the safety car, the pace car, before anybody realized kind of what was going on. Like, wait a minute, who's driving this thing? Should it be going? We weren't ready to start rolling yet. And they had finished this entire lap, and then the officials were like, what are we going to do? We got to stop this guy. So they barricaded the track, and they had motorcycles come out to pursue the dude so that by his second time around, they were able actually to prevent him from driving further.
Oh, I'm sure the crowd was going crazy. Like, you could imagine Talladega as a party and a half, and then someone stealing the pace car. I'm sure the crowd was just rooting for him. It's like they basically got to watch a high-speed police chase live in front of them before the race got started.
And it unfolded in slow motion, right? As soon as the car starts rolling out, nobody realized anything was that unusual except for the timing of it. Like, they weren't ready for it to happen. So fans watching, it's like, pace car's out front of the pack. What's going on here? And then he kept circling, and it was not until he came almost all the way around before people realized this isn't right.
Yeah, I'm sure they were thinking, like, is someone giving a hot lap or someone important need to go out there? They're checking something. And then I'm sure one person talked to the other person and was like, well, I'm not in the pace car. Are you in the pace car? Well, no. Well, who's out there? Who's driving it? So I'm sure it probably ended in him getting pulled out and handcuffed and quickly taken to the local jail.
And if you think about it, NASCAR runs what seems like every single weekend during their season, right? 35, 40 races a year. So the potential for something to go wrong with any part of the race, let alone, the pace car, safety car kind of stuff, is a lot higher than in other series that just don't run as often. So it shouldn't be that surprising that we've got a lot of these stories coming out of NASCAR, just given the number of races that they're out there doing.
Right. Yeah. If you look at the percentage, though, most of the times there's no story behind the pace car. So when something does happen related to the pace car or the safety car, it's really funny and everyone has a good laugh about it because it's usually it's not a part of the show or part of the headlines after the race week is over. But another instance that occurred was in 2014 at Daytona. A Chevy SS was used as the pace car for that race.
Oh, that was the old Holden that they imported from Australia and they rebadged as a Chevy SS? Is that right?
Oh, yeah. So it's got the Corvette motor.
The V8.
4 doors. Really cool car. Really awesome car. I mean, back in 2014, that thing was brand new. Chevy's trying to pump them off the line, which that car wasn't very successful. So I'm sure they were trying to do a lot of promotion and marketing, and being the pace car at Daytona is a great way to go about that.
So much, it was a sleeper car, even though it was the pace car. Like, people just didn't really know what that thing was about.
Right, exactly. And back then, the NASCARs, the Chevys, were SSs. So, I mean, it was very fitting that they had the street car out there to be the pace car. Now, to be the pace car, you need to make some modifications to a normal street car. A lot of those things have to do with lights, radios, switches, electronics. So there's a lot of additional wiring that gets put into these vehicles to make them official pace cars and be able to operate and do all the things that they need to do. So what happened in 2014 was all of a sudden the pace car started slowing down, coming down off the apron, and they're like, what's going on? And then some smoke started billowing out from behind the pace car. And originally you're thinking oh my God, did this thing blow up? Did they blow up the engine? But as the smoke started pouring out and the car started coming to a stop, you could see that the entire interior was filled with smoke. And what had happened was there was an electrical fire that broke out, that some wires, some electrical issue happened and started setting the interior of this Chevy SS on fire. And obviously, thankfully, you're at a racetrack, so fire safety was quickly on the scene to make sure that the thing didn't go up in flames or there wasn't any further issues. And all that happened was just a slight delay that they had to go pull out another backup safety car to get out in front of the field and continue on. But a little bit of a hairy situation that occurred there.
Given what people were expecting from this thing, this is the car that really should be no drama. There's nothing going on with the safety car, the pace car, really ever, except when it goes really wrong. And all of those electronics you referred to, right, they had to go somewhere. And frequently they need to have room for passengers, or there's not that much room. So they put it all in the trunk, and then it all caught on fire and it was just billowing out, just kind of craziness. Some other things have happened that were maybe not quite as catastrophic, but kind of funny. In 2022, Kyle Busch was out there driving, and I guess Dale Jr. was the person driving the pace car. And it's not clear if it was he was just bumping him to kind of give him a hard time, or it was just he was trying to urge him along. But Kyle kept bump drafting effectively the pace car with Dale Jr. driving it. It was just kind of a weird scene, and people didn't really expect to see anybody banging into the pace car. It was just kind of a weird thing.
Kyle Busch has hit the pace car multiple times. One of them was when Junior was driving the pace car. He was the kind of grand marshal pace car driver for one of the races. And Kyle Busch was on the pole and wanted to give him a hard time and give him a little bump draft, make him feel like he was a part of the crew. Then there was another instance, which was in the New Hampshire Speedway incident with the pace car. What had happened is there was a random downpour of rain. And NASCAR didn't throw a caution. The cars went into turn one. Kyle Busch was leading the race. He slips on the rain, tears off the rear end of his car. And I think it was like 4 or 5 more cars wrecked after him because of this random downfall of rain. Kyle Busch, the typical way that he is, got a little upset and frustrated that there was no caution, and he wrecked his race car leading the race because NASCAR couldn't see that the rain was coming. And so when the pace car came out to slow down the field, obviously there was a handful of cars that wrecked. He went up to the pace car, and not in a friendly way like he did with Junior. He started hitting the pace car relatively hard and started going back and forth trying to tear off the rear bumper cover off this pace car, showing his displeasure with NASCAR and the way that they're handling the race. You can probably assume that he got a pretty decent fine for roughing up the pace car because of being upset that he had wrecked out. So Kyle Busch was involved in a couple pace car stories there.
Rubbing his racing, I guess, includes the pace car. How is that?
Yeah, I mean, in this incident, you could see, like, the pace car, like, he was moving the rear end of it. Like, the guy in the pace car was having to, like, follow the rear and not lose control. In that situation, it was a Toyota Camry, which, like, this brings up this, like, interesting discussion of, like, yes, usually the pace car is something cool, mainly for the marquee races, like Corvettes, Camaros, like, stuff like that. But for, like, kind of these, like, normal NASCAR races that aren't the, like, massive, marquee events, it's just a Toyota Camry. And, like, going back to this whole collectability question, I'm like, who the hell do you think is going to collect the official NASCAR pace car when it's a Toyota Camry, like, hybrid? Like, who wants that?
I don't know. Would Martinsville be considered one of the marquee races? That seems like one of those races that if you're not a NASCAR fan, you've probably not heard of. In 2023, they had a Chevy Camaro ZL1, and it was a pink one. So it was really visible out on the track. And that pace car broke down on track. I guess some debris came off of one of the cars and damaged the car's wiring harness. And so it actually had to be towed off the racetrack. So you imagine this scene, like all these cars just kind of hanging out, waiting for the pace car. And here comes the wrecker to get the pace car itself off the racetrack.
Yeah, it's super funny to, like, actually watch the safety equipment, like, come and tow the pace car off the track. I think in that instance, they were talking about, like, thankfully the cleanup truck or the safety truck that was out there was still, like, pacing the field. So when the Camaro went down, like, all the drivers were, like, confused of, like, do we stop behind the pace car? Like, what's going on? Like, is it a red flag condition? They were, like, unsure if they were supposed to overtake it or not. And they ended up following around the safety truck, and, like, that was able to keep pace while they, like, towed the pace car off. But, like, see, in that instance, pink Camaro, like, I'd collect that. Like, that seems a little bit more special than a Toyota Camry.
Hell yeah. And just to make it more interesting, you think about the budget of a racing series and all this infrastructure and stuff that they have to have. So there's this single car dedicated just to kind of leading the pack and, needs to be capable. When that car died and had to be towed, they had an identical pink Camaro ZL1 waiting in the wings. So they used that as the pace car for the rest of the race. So just think about that. And yeah, I think the diecast of that would be kind of cool.
Oh, yeah. No, and they always have, like, backup cars. I think there's at least 2, if not 3 pace cars, just in case, right? Just in case something happens or whatever it is, they always have a backup pace car. Now, this reminds me of another instance that happened in NASCAR. I forget the year, but I feel like it was, like, the 1980s or 1990s, and there was a race where the individual came across, took the checkered flag, and then blew out a rear tire. And then the thing comes careening down through the infield, down towards the pit wall, and, like, right where the opening was of where the pace cars were sitting, somehow perfectly misses the wall and just head-on collision with one of the pace cars. after the race was over. They missed, in that instance, they had like both pace cars lined up next to one another. He missed one of them and smoked the other.
Just incredible.
You always think like, oh, like how could this happen? How could a car end up in this situation? It's like NASCAR runs enough races and there's enough cars out on track. It's like a car will end up in every position at one point or the other. I think there was another case in an Xfinity race in NASCAR where one of the cars spun off the backstretch. I forget which track it was at, but it spun off the backstretch, and where it came to a stop and it was unable to move due to crash damage, but it blocked the hole in which the pace car needed to come out of to catch the field. So this car was like broadside in the hole, and it was a Toyota Supra was the pace car for that event, and they were like trying to pull out, and they're like, we can't fit. Like, we can't get out to catch the field.
Oh, Jesus. You figure, like, these cars should know where they are at all times. They're the official safety vehicle that's supposed to be on track. And so not being able to preserve that for those cars, like, what are you guys doing? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But then, there's cases where just, craziness happens and there's mishaps along the way. In 2024, the race at Phoenix, they had the Camry pace car again that managed to crash into the, those sand-filled safety barrels that they put at the head of pit lanes so you don't head on into the concrete wall. Yeah, smashed right into those during the stage 2 restart. The driver made kind of a late turn in and caused some damage to the cars, but they had to fix the barriers.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they had to bring out another caution for just the cleanup that happened. I think I remember that race. Yeah, he just like turned in too late. And like the announcers were thinking that Chase Elliott had like got into him. Like, oh, maybe the pace car slowed down unexpectedly and got hit by one of the other cars. But nope, he did it all on his own and drove that thing straight into the barriers. Once again, the Toyota Camry.
And that was the NASCAR season finale. So that was the championship race, which was then red flag because the safety car hit some barrels.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm sure no one was watching that race.
Probably not. It's never one of the most important ones anyway, so it's, NASCAR. Well, that gets us kind of to the current era. Maybe we should go and look at a little bit of the history of IndyCar since they have the same kind of pace car model before we go to Formula 1.
Yeah, let's just jump into a couple IndyCar stories, and then we'll do that deep dive into F1, and we'll switch our wording over to safety car rather than pace car.
Yeah, I've probably misused that a couple of times or exchanged it. So if you heard me say pace car, then that was right. If you heard me say safety car, then that wasn't completely right for NASCAR or for Indy.
It's interchangeable. I feel like we'd be picking at tiny hairs if we really cared about the difference between the naming of the two.
Well, in IndyCar, if we go back to, let's say, the 70s, at the Indy 500, there was a pretty famous example of a pace car issue. It was a Dodge Challenger convertible. We might think about the wisdom of using a convertible as the pace car, but they did that. It was good for pictures and, that kind of fanfare of the Indy 500 kind of cruising around with the top down. That seems kind of cool.
Well, yeah, back in the day, too, it was kind of like part of the whole hoopla of like the beginning of the race. And they used a lot of convertibles back in like the 50s and the 60s because like they'd have some like
Grand Marshal.
Or girls.
Oh, yeah, the beauty pageant winners.
Yeah, exactly. There was some fanfare going on. The convertible was great for that.
Right. And in this case, the pace car didn't crash into another race car on the racetrack. They lost control and spun out into the photographer's stand on the side of the road that they have set up for the cameraman. Just smoked it.
How do you lose control after you've come off track?
Dodge Challenger.
That's the
That's the answer. I don't know. You wonder who was driving that one.
I think it was like a Dodge representative. It was another one of those cases of like trying to get the brand out there of like, go buy a Dodge Challenger.
It was a local Indianapolis Dodge dealer who drove the orange 1971 Dodge Challenger convertible pace car that crashed in a photographer's stand at the end of the 1971 Indy 500. Apparently, it happened in pit lane at roughly 60 miles an hour, and because of late braking, it injured 29 people.
Damn.
Not great. Guess who passengers in that pace car were at the time?
Who?
John Glenn, the astronaut. So can you imagine the guy safely went into space, came back, returned to Earth. We want to celebrate this hero, and we nearly took out his life in a pace car.
At the start of the Indy 500. I've seen the footage of this. It looks like he wanted to like beat the field to the start-finish line because he came down into pit lane and just never slowed down. It looked like he almost picked up some speed. And then, yeah, he got like towards the end of pit lane and like maybe got out of his like red mist of just like, gripping the wheel. Then he's like, oh, I need to jump on the brakes. And then the thing just careened into a crowd. You think this would have been a Ford Mustang if it was doing activities like this.
Yeah, leaving cars and coffee. Well, apparently they said that it was a marker flag that they'd used during practice as sort of the indicator of when to turn in. That got moved. So they were confused and like had to deal with it in a hurry.
But he went all the way down pit lane.
He came in too hot.
And he just never slowed down. I mean, pit lane at Indianapolis is long. It's got to be close to half a mile long that he was just booking it.
Right, and great visibility for Dodge. Only the second time they ever had a Dodge pace car leading the race for the Indy 500.
So. Oh, I'm sure they were invited back very quickly after the 1971 running.
Absolutely. Well, let's fast forward a couple decades.
Yeah, let's go to 2018. That was a really famous wreck that happened before an IndyCar race got started. It was at the Detroit GP. You can imagine Detroit, the motherland of American-built cars.
And street course, right? This is the Belle Isle Detroit circuit.
Yes, super rough. I think they had it was like a railroad crossing or something like that. There was like a transition that was like pretty gnarly, like a little rise at the exit of a corner. And I think it was the GM CEO was driving a new Corvette ZR1 to lead the field. You can imagine a lot of horsepower. I think Detroit is also a concrete circuit, so not a lot of grip, really bumpy. Anyway, he comes out of a corner, gooses it. I mean, just whomps on the throttle, loses the rear end of the car, straight into the wall, clears off the front clip of this Corvette. And like the rest of the Indy cars like have to like slow down because like the track is basically taken up by this wrecked Corvette. Parts are everywhere. The CEO gets out. I mean, he just looks like, oh my God, what have I done? And before the race even gets started, they have to do like track cleanup.
Not good planning on anybody's part, and it didn't exactly create a great experience for everybody there kind of waiting through the cleanup of this mess.
Yeah, but even, wrecking pace cars, you might think like, oh, well, that guy was just inexperienced and just being a goober behind the wheel, wanting to show off in this Corvette, high horsepower, whatever the case, and lost control. Well, there was another instance that occurred in 2022 in which a pace car was crashed at an IndyCar race. Now, you might be thinking, oh yeah, another idiot behind the wheel. What was he thinking about doing? It was actually Romain Grosjean. The ex-F1 driver took out one of the Honda pace cars for a hot lap at Laguna Seca a day before the race was going to happen to kind of do some media marketing stuff. Anyway, he comes into pit lane, and at Laguna Seca, pit in, there's a really tight, almost over 90-degree turn coming into pit lane, and it really narrows down. It kind of drops off, tends to get pretty dirty in there as well. Anyway, he comes in way too hot, understeers, and just smokes the tire barrier with the front end of this, I think it was a Honda Civic Type R, and airbags fully deployed, like totaled this car coming into pit lane. And thankfully they had like the security footage that they were able to replay that you can watch this on YouTube of him just careening into pit lane, totaling this car. So every once in a while, some safety cars are put into unsafe situations. Even by expert hands, things can happen.
Yeah, the most experienced people. I mean, Romain Grosjean, okay, sometimes he's sort of a punchline, but, effective in F1, IndyCar, endurance racing, even people at that level make these kind of mistakes. Although it is kind of funny that it was Grosjean. And there were others. There was, I think, a late 90s race at Texas where there was a pace car driven by Johnny Rutherford, and he managed to smash into one of the race cars in the pits. And ultimately it comes down to inattention, errors, mistakes. Sometimes it's because the car breaks down or, it catches on fire or something like that. But you have to imagine the pressure of being a pace car driver is probably pretty high. I mean, all eyes are on you. You're not on the same machinery as the people out there who are doing the racing. A lot of the people driving those cars don't have that kind of history or background. Sometimes they do. It's a former IndyCar driver. A lot of times they bring in these ringers, these celebrities, or people who just aren't that experienced out there, and it ends badly.
Yeah, or you get caught up in like the fanfare and just the energy of the moment. Like think about if you're just like in front of the field, all these fans, all these things going on, like your brain might be overwhelmed and you're not really like paying attention, or you kind of forget or have one little lapse. And even though you're in a pace car or a safety car, you're not actually racing, you're not actually in a race car. even in these moments where there's a lot of things that could potentially go wrong, like if you have that little lapse of judgment, like stuff like this can happen. Or like you're trying to show off or be the cool guy on the out lap trying to slide the car and it just all goes wrong. Everyone's watching. It's on video. We get to watch the replay 15 times over and make fun of you forever. And it's funny how like, yeah, usually with the pace car, things don't really happen. So like anytime something does, like these stories, they last a very long time. And people won't forget that moment that they saw the safety car being unsafe. Let's move on to the F1 story. I think that's going to be more fascinating of how did the safety car come about? And it took F1 a very long time to start implementing a safety car and having that be a part of their race process.
Yeah, F1 started in 1950. So by then, they could look around and see what other series were doing in terms of managing traffic, starting their races, dealing with cautions, restarts, things like that. Formula One was pretty notorious coming into this era in the 70s with the danger level, just the number of crashes and wrecks and injuries and fatalities that occurred in this sport. It got a really bad reputation. And so leading up to the late 70s, a number of these incidents had occurred, and the leadership of F1 at the time included Bernie Ecclestone. And he sought out a doctor he knew who was a neurosurgeon, very famous neurosurgeon who practiced both in the United States, in New York, as well as in the UK, in London, by the name of Sid Watkins. And Sid Watkins was named as the first official sort of season-wide, series-wide medical director for Formula One. And there had been what they called track doctors before, where they would have medical personnel deployed to individual racetracks, but it was sort of whoever was available from the local community, and they might be interested in racing or not, or just being dispatched to this thing. So they wouldn't always have a lot of sense about what motorsport was or experience dealing with the kinds of injuries or fatalities that would occur due to blunt force trauma and high-speed impacts like you'd see in racing. So in 1978, Formula One officially designated Sid Watkins, this neurosurgeon, to be the official Formula One medical official. And they gave him a car, which was going to be called the medical car, that would circulate around the track behind the pack and or be dispatched immediately upon there being some radio message or indication that there was a crash on the racetrack. If weather prevented a normal racing start because it was raining really badly or something went really awry, they'll deploy this safety car and or the medical car. So something else to note here is there was the division between what was the safety car for the purpose of pacing the field and the medical car for the purposes of dealing with crashes and incidents and actually providing medical support on the scene of a crash on the racetrack. If you go back before that, though, in Formula One, kind of funny, in 1973 was when they introduced their safety car for the purposes of being a pace car. It was at the Canadian Grand Prix, and if you've never heard about the 1973 Canadian Grand Prix, it's worth digging into. The race had all kinds of issues, and of course there was weather. The pace car that was chosen for this first time ever was a yellow Porsche 914. What an odd choice of a car. So first of all, this was Porsche's bargain basement car, their economic model. It was a 4-cylinder car. It was made basically out of Volkswagen parts. It looked a lot like a Carmen Ghia or something inspired kind of car. And they had this be the lead car to go out and run ahead of all of the Formula One cars at this race. Well, what happened was the lead pace car was such a new concept of Formula One. The person that they had driving it lost track of the leader of the race and messed up badly. So he got involved after there was a safety incident, and he incorrectly positioned himself in front of the wrong car instead of the actual race leader.
Oh, nice.
So you can imagine the kind of people scratching their head like, what's going on? Where's this thing going? They're not even used to having this kind of car out on track while they're racing. And as a result of this, part of the field was just improperly placed. They were in the wrong places in the grid, on the wrong places on the track. And a lot of drivers were incorrectly scored as being one lap down by the scoring people because it was out of sync with what the pace car, the safety car was doing. It took literally hours after the finish of the race for them to go through all the timing data and all the statistics that they had. And remember, no telemetry back then. This was all people keeping score and track of things by hand and having to cross-correlate their data. And they eventually determined one true winner of that race, who was Peter Revson, just with total confusion up to that point. as a result of how poorly administered that was, we didn't see another safety car in Formula One for 20 years until 1993.
See, that's crazy. So in 1973, they tried for the first time to have a safety car. Didn't go really well. They're like, maybe we don't need this thing. It caused more problems than it provided solutions for. But then in that interim that they didn't have any safety cars, you said in 1978, they then started the medical car. So the medical car at least existed for a period of time, but it took them until 1993 to bring the concept of the safety car back. That's crazy.
Yeah, and there were a ton of really bad incidents that occurred in Formula One during that interim between when they tried to introduce the pace car style safety car in 73 and introducing the medical car officially and the medical director role in 78. In 1973, you had Francois Severe die at the U.S. Grand Prix at Watkins Glen. In 74, we had a crash. In 75, we had Mark Donohue die during practice. In 77, we had an incident that was a tragic death in Formula One. In 78, Ronnie Peterson died after his crash at the Italian Grand Prix, and that was actually the impetus for them bringing Sid Watkins into Formula One, just this spate of deaths and injuries that had occurred. And it was a good thing that they did it, but it took them nearly 20 more years to get that whole safety car, pace car thing ironed out and back on track.
Yeah, which it's crazy for me to think about. Like, it makes sense that they don't have a need for a pace car because, once again, F1 does standing start. So it's like they go out for their formation lap, they sit on the grid, and then they go. And even during the race starts, the safety car and the medical car are behind the field on those starts, and they follow the cars into turn one just in case there's an incident. They can be right there on the scene. That's modern day F1. But thinking back towards the 70s, when, especially in the early 70s, when there wasn't a medical car as well as not a safety car, it was kind of a free-for-all. Like, you think about it, it's like when there was incidents out on track, like there might be localized yellows or whatever, or these cars that have been, damaged, and it was kind of up to like the turn marshals to go over there and help the drivers out or put the car out or whatever it was. But for the most part, I think in F1, like, they would just leave the cars on the side of the roads, and like the drivers would just hop over the fence and try to make their way back to pit lane. Like, it was kind of just a continuation of the race and not a lot of safety there. And I know that there's been a handful of incidents in that era of F1 where like corner marshals crossing the track getting hit by cars that were still at speed, or there was an accident, a crash, and there's people trying to attend to that crash, and someone else spins off and crashes into that car, and people getting hit and tossed and thrown and stuff like that. And it's kind of crazy that they really left it up to the drivers to be like, yeah, there's stuff going on track, yellow flags are out, slow down to what you think is safe, and then we'll get back to racing after that. Just keep it going.
Think about all those analogies that people make between motorsports and combat or being at war. And this is a case where they were leaving the bodies on the field, right? They were just still out there. Yeah. And the race would be continuing, and there'd be smoking wreckage on the side of the racetrack. And every once in a while, you'd see one of the racing drivers literally pull over and get out of their car to try to help somebody who needed help on the side of the road. It wasn't a great scene, and much credit due to Bernie Ecclestone and those leading Formula One through this era to bring and implement this sort of safety protocol, medical director roles, things like that, to make it important so that we did see a real reduction of lethal injuries with the introduction of those roles and those cars. And something else about this is, of course, the Formula One cars continue to get faster and faster. And so the Porsche 914 was sort of a joke because it could barely keep pace, with another road car, let alone with a Formula One car. So over time, they had to get a little bit more creative and cast a wider net with what kind of cars that they can use for their pace car. It sure wouldn't make sense for it to be a Formula One car, minimally because there's generally two people in the car, so that's not going to work out so well, but for plenty of other reasons. So some of the interesting cars that popped up as safety cars in the history of Formula One, in addition to that Porsche 914, we've had a Lamborghini Countach out there, pretty cool looking red Countach. We've seen 911s plenty of times. The Aston Martin Vantage F1 edition more recently. For a little while, there was a really funny choice, the Fiat Tempra, which if you've never seen is like a little Econo box that they had with the safety car lights on it as well. And more recently, of course, the Mercedes AMG cars. We had the AMG GT-R for a few years, followed by the Mercedes AMG GT Black Series. And those have been used, again, as safety cars, explicitly separate from the medical cars, which generally needed to be a 4-seater car, right? These 2-seater cars zipping around to be fast out of front of the pack. What good's that going to do if you have to go grab a guy off the ground and put him in a car, like take him back? So they had to have a back seat. Generally, this meant estate cars, wagons, and eventually SUVs became the preferred choice of car for the medical cars. When Sid Watkins was starting out, I remember seeing the Mercedes wagons. I think it was an E55 wagon that they had built up as the medical car. And more recently, they've been using the very cool looking Aston Martin DBX. And I think they've created an F1 edition of that as well, I believe, if not just the DBX 707, whatever newest model of that is, that they use currently for the medical cars. So you have two of the teams who are actually participating in Formula One now, between Mercedes and Aston Martin, providing their road-going vehicles, modified, but still, to be advertisements for their companies and to be out there to be part of the racing action in a different role than the race cars themselves.
Like we were talking about in the early 90s, that's when the safety car really started to come back and was like now a prominent feature of F1 racing. And it wasn't until 1996, so there was a 3-year span when safety cars were mandated, but there wasn't until 1996 that there was an official partnership between a manufacturer and F1. So from 93 to 96, you kind of got random stuff of whatever F1 wanted to use as the safety car for this race or that race, and kind of one-off specialties. And then in 96, that's when there was that actual partnership that was made between Mercedes and F1, where Mercedes was then going to provide safety cars as well as the medical cars for F1. And I think they were the official safety car, medical car for F1 for over 25 years, which was impressive. And then at that point, and it wasn't until Lawrence Stroll took over Aston Martin that he was like, hey, we want some skin in the game here. We also want to be the official safety car as well as medical car for F1. And so now Mercedes and Aston Martin share that obligation to be able to do for F1. But between 96 and kind of the current years, Mercedes has given us some pretty cool cars. Like you were talking about, the wagons, the AMG wagons are so epic. And those were the medical cars of like if they needed to throw someone in the backseat or whatever the case was.
Yeah.
And it was like the early 2000s E55 AMG wagons, which just look epic on those like monoblock style wheels and like paint matched silver with the silver wheels. Just so cool. And then as like things progressed, I mean, AMGs still were cool into like the mid 2000s, and you had like E63 AMG wagons, and then the CLK 63 AMGs as well as the safety cars. Now, I think the way that we got on this story was we were talking about the CLKs in general, of how like they're such a unique car because like the road going car versus the race car variant and then the special editions, like it's just such a wide spectrum in regards to Mercedes.
Those are so different.
And I didn't know that the CLK AMG Black Series that came out, and I think around like the mid 2000s, I didn't know that the Black Series bodywork, the fender flares, the wheel design was mimicked to look like the official F1 safety car. And then I looked into it and I was like, yeah, the 2006 CLK 63 AMG safety car for F1 was just an AMG. It wasn't a Black Series. They just decided to add fender flares to provide a wider tire to make the car go faster for F1 safety car duty. And then when they came out with the Black Series, they're like, yeah, let's just make it look like the safety car. Like, that'd be sick. And I had no idea.
It was a sick-looking car, too, right? The safety car itself, they had the bolted-on over fenders. A lot of those things that they wound up bringing into the black edition of that car came right off of the safety car.
Yeah, which I had no idea. I would have just assumed that Mercedes came out with the Black Series, and they're like, yeah, just make the Black Series the safety car. But like, no, the safety car was not a Black Series, and the Black Series was mimicked to look like the official safety car. To me, that just makes the Black Series that much cooler, that it was basically like a quote-unquote safety car special.
And there was this affinity with Mercedes, right, having been the official safety car for all of this time, it being a silver car, right, the silver arrows, the silver colors of their livery. However, if the purpose of this car is safety, wouldn't visibility be an important thing? And when they first came out with this car, remember, it was a yellow Porsche 914. So really squat little car, kind of hard to see, but it was yellow, so at least it was bright and you could see it out in front. So over time, you'll notice that the safety cars started getting brighter and brighter, and now we see bright red and orange safety cars that are deployed because they're just easier to see, easier to spot. They provide more contrast on the broadcast. I think it's just an identity difference that people have become accustomed to, and Mercedes has been part of that all along, up until your comment about Aston Martin kind of joining the fold. Additionally, the driver of that safety car, and it's been the same driver since the 90s, which is kind of a cool thing.
That's wild.
The dude's name is Bert Maylander, and he's a German race car driver who was affiliated with Mercedes brands and racing, including over in DTM. So that's the Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters, right? The touring car racing series that's just epic over in Germany at the Nürburgring and other sites. And that was a car that was a variation of the CLK DTM that had come out. So again, that affinity between the brand, the models of cars, racing, the purpose of these cars, and the derivatives that were able to come from that and actually trickle down into the production road cars was a really cool thing. And I think Mercedes has gotten a lot of good mileage out of playing that role and kind of being out at the forefront of the pack and identified as part of Formula One, the infrastructure itself.
Yeah. Now, talking about F1 and safety cars, I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of examples like we talked about with NASCAR and IndyCar of when there was incidences with the safety car and maybe even the medical car sometimes of getting involved in crashes in F1. So do we have any good stories from Formula One of the safety car becoming a situation?
There might be a couple out there. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, let's go to the 90s again, because that seems to be a fun era to jump right into. At the Monaco Grand Prix, there's a team called Footwork, and we've talked about them before because they were famously the team that partnered with Porsche. So it was actually a car with a Porsche motor in it. And the driver named Taki Inui was out there, and he's kind of a funny reputation, but he got crashed into by the safety car, which was a Renault Clio.
Yeah, I think in that incident, he had crashed into the wall, and the safety car was doing promotional laps or whatever, because this was in like free practice that this occurred. And after he had impacted the wall, he unbuckled his belts because he's just alone, stranded, waiting for someone to come get him. And during that time, the safety car comes around the corner, doesn't realize that there's a car wrecked on track, smashes into his car hard enough that it flips the car over and catapults him out of the vehicle because he's not belted in. And he hits the pavement hard enough. Thankfully, he didn't take off his helmet, but he ended up getting a concussion from that incident with the safety car.
That's just nuts. You think, like, what is the circumstances that have to come together to make this happen? Well, get ready. It happened again to the same driver. So at the 1995 Hungarian Grand Prix, again, Taki Inui, he was hit by the official medical car, which was a Tatra 623. And it was while he was trying to put a fire out in his engine on the side of the track.
Talk about like the most unlucky driver in F1 history of like how in the same year do you get hit by the safety car, flipped over, concussed, and then in the same season at the Hungarian GP, you get smoked by the medical car.
While you're putting a fire out on your own car.
Like, you were having issues with the team, you're having issues with your driving, and you're getting hit by the medical car and the safety car. The video, I don't think there's a video from the Monaco incident. There's just kind of like photos from the aftermath. But there is video from the Hungarian Grand Prix, and he runs to the wall, grabs a fire extinguisher. As soon as he turns back to run back towards the car, just gets smoked, laid out on the hood of the medical car and launched onto the ground, just trying to put out his car. It's comical the way that this all unfolds.
It's one of those situations where once race cars get on grass, it's over, right? And the medical car wound up on the grass, and that was it. And the guy just got smashed into. Kind of crazy.
All right, let's transition to another medical car story that happened in 2000. So now it's past 1996. We have the partnership with Mercedes. So the medical car is that E55 AMG wagon that's just so sick. But at the Monaco GP, the medical car driver loses control and just buries the thing into the tire pack, completely crunches the front end.
And if it's any wonder, this was an ex-Formula One driver who was driving the medical car at the time, a guy by the name of Alex Ribeiro. So yeah, he managed to actually crash badly enough to break the ribs of the medical director, Sid Watkins, who was sitting in the car with him.
That doesn't seem like a great thing to happen before the race needs to go underway, is that your medical director needs medical attention.
Yeah, who's he going to go to? Then in 2002, there was another crash involving Ribeiro as the driver of the medical car. with the Sauber car at Interlagos in Sao Paulo. And again, plowed right into the safety car.
I don't think he was driving much longer after that if he was involved in multiple incidences.
Well, it's one thing that we have so much appreciation for Bernd Maylander, who's been the safety car driver this whole time. And he's really a great wheel. I mean, like, you look at that guy out there and how little drama there is, how fast he's got to drive. He's really pushing his production car to its limit to be able to stay at pace with these Formula One cars. They need to keep heat in their tires. They need to be able to drive fast enough to continue on. So it takes some skills. And I guess the skills required, fortunately for the safety car, are higher. So we have the full-time better race car driver in that one versus part-time assignments and people who are in the medical car maybe who had other things on their mind.
Yeah, and even speaking about that, of that individual that's been the driver of the safety car for so long and has such a pedigree within motorsports, even he's stuffed a safety car in all of his years.
Oh, yeah.
I think he only had one incident that occurred, and it actually occurred relatively recently in 2024. He was driving one of the Aston Martin safety cars, and he was doing scouting laps or whatever the case was, comes into one of the turns at Monza and goes to go to the brakes and has some sort of brake system failure in the Aston where it only locks the rear of the car. And if you watch the footage, it seems like, oh man, this dude just came in too hot, lost it, and buried it into the tire wall. But if you actually analyze the footage, you can tell that he realizes that he's having some brake failure. He's not going to be able to slow the car down. And he actually tosses the thing sideways to try to scrub as much speed as possible before impacting the tire barriers. And it skipped across the sand trap and all that sort of stuff and damaged the Aston pretty well.
I mean, if you think about it, the guy driving this car is an experienced race driver. We sometimes take for granted how important that is. When you have that instinct, that natural wiring for what do you do if things go badly, and it happens suddenly, and you're not able to kind of plan for this, it's just a reaction. Well, Bernd Maylander is a great driver and figured out quickly, like, he didn't have brakes on his car, or at least not sufficient brakes to make what was coming up. So he maneuvered his car, he kind of scrubbed off some speed, entered into a spin on purpose to scrub more speed so that when there was finally an impact, he wasn't harmed. You know, the car took a little damage, but can you imagine at full speed if the guy just went right into the barriers and wasn't accustomed to having to deal with that kind of thing? So really good choice of the driver, really good skills evidenced by Maylander, and we're really lucky for having all of that because who knows what could go on wrong.
Yeah, and it's super prevalent in F1 of, like, we're talking about that the driver of the safety car needs to be someone that can wheel a car, because I mean, like, the pace at which that they're sending these, you know, AMG Black Series or the Aston Martins or whatever it is, like, they're using a decent percentage of that car to stay in front of F1 cars, and it takes some serious skill. And I feel like there's not a lot of people that realize that being a safety car driver at one of these upper echelon series is a real-time job, and you got to be on top of it, and the timing to which to deploy the safety car and get out in front of the field and, you know, being ready at a moment's notice to make that stuff happen is all super important to be able to run a race smoothly and safely and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I mean, incidences with the safety car or the medical car or the pace car, like we were talking about with NASCAR and IndyCar, those incidents are kind of few and far between. That's why these stories kind of survive the test of time, because they are just so unique and off the wall and, like, so abnormal to actually happen. And the people that run those cars and the sanctioning bodies that run the operations take it very seriously. And it's just a piece to the overall puzzle of putting on a race that not a lot of people consider.
It's one of those things where it's kind of funny because it's so unexpected and it's not supposed to happen that way.
Right.
The same way, like, somebody of authority or in a position where they're supposed to be doing something a certain way has a fall from grace, and it's kind of funny. That same thing has happened because the safety car is held in such a high position of expectation about what they're going to do. So when there is an incident, those are so unusual, they do stick out quite a bit.
All right. Well, this has been a fun conversation. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Sylas.
And thanks for listening. This has been Cold Start.